often that sort of communication is pleasant. You're not beholden to your phone in the same way that because you're away for that long, you're not beholden to work, and all of a sudden you have that freedom. Despite the fact I've got to get to Kathmandu to catch a flight on the 16th of March.
Welcome to the Crossing It Off podcast, where each episode we share the stories of individuals that are living out their bucket/life goal lists. I am your host, Roger Williams, and through hearing our guests' adventures, my goal is that you will find encouragement and empowerment to add and cross items off of your list. Welcome, everybody, to another great show. We've got a great guest lined up here today, and I'm super excited about it. So many people have been inspired by Jules Vern and his adventures that he wrote, especially around the world in 80 days. And our next guest has experienced some of that adventure, and his name is Nick Cooper. He describes himself as a baker, a dungeon master. We have that in common. A trivia whore, self-described, and a terrible DIYer. Nick, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, delighted to be with you, Roger. And a little bit overwhelmed to be compared to Jules Verne. But, thank you.
At least you got to experience that. So what is it that you crossed off your list?
So it was Circumnavigating the Globe in 2011.
2011
experience.
Yeah,
Yes.
I imagine. Yeah. So how the basic questions, how long did it take you?
A little bit longer than 80 days. I don't think I was setting any records. It took me about 7.5 months from February 2011 to about just September 2011, I think it was. Yeah.
So what was the reason behind it? Was it a gap year thing? Was it just that you wanted to go see the world before you settled down? What was going through your head when you said, I'm going to go do this? I'm
delighted you think it might have been a gap year, because obviously I look a bit too old, I think, for me to have been my gap year 11 years ago. I didn't have a gap year when I finished university or beforehand. So I didn't have enough money fundamentally. Yeah, there were it linked into my bucket list more generally. There were a lot of things that I wanted to do in different countries around the globe. And so after I started work, and I wasn't earning that much money, but I figured a lot of the places I wanted to go to wouldn't be that expensive. If I worked for a few years, saved up a few pounds, I could, tick off a number of things on my bucket list in the course of ticking off the big thing, which was circumnavigating the globe. So,
yeah. I love that idea of combining things together. I just went through that experience too, where you're doing one thing and also checking other stuff off. I think that's a great way to financially to get things done, especially if you're traveling. Yeah. So where did you start?
So I threw myself into the deep end. I think I knew to an extent I was throwing myself into the deep end, but not quite how deep that deep end was. So I started in India, in Delhi. So I flew from London straight to India. Initially, I was thinking about going to Europe, but I realized that my money wasn't going to stretch itself quite so far, and I'd already seen quite a bit of Europe anyway. Straight into Delhi. And I booked one night at a hostel. I didn't have any forward plans from there. I just knew that I had to leave India via a land border to Nepal about 6 weeks later in order to catch a flight out of Kathmandu. Straight into Delhi. That was an experience. It's pretty. I mean, I love India. I've been back since. I actually went on my honeymoon for a few days to Mumbai before we flew out to Mauritius. Straight into Delhi. It was cool. It was interesting.
And did you work while you were doing this? So you had 7 weeks, or I think you said 6 or 7 weeks between Delhi and getting to Kathmandu. Were you just walking that whole time? Were you traveling? Were you working, just seeing stuff? What was your experience in between those places?
Yeah, so two things. First off, as I say, whilst I didn't have a lot of money, I did have about 2.5 years to save up, and I was actually living with my parents at the time, so that was doable. So I didn't want to work when I was away. I mean, I don't subscribe to the notion that work makes you a better person. I hate work. I think it's
agreed.
I just don't want to starve. So I saved up enough money, which I roughly estimated would be enough to get me around without working. I actually arrived back in the country with just enough train fare to get me back from London to where I lived at the time. I pretty much got it spot on, although I was pretty poor when I was in the States for the final few weeks. But so I didn't work. And in terms of what I was doing in India, one of the things on my bucket list was to go and see the Cricket World Cup, which was happening in India that year. And if you're going to see the Cricket World Cup, you want to see it in India. It's pretty crazy. I mean, they go. You think you've seen a big sporting spectacle, somewhere in the UK, or I don't know, watching whatever it might be in the States. But seeing cricket lovers in India, and India won it that year, which was the most amazing thing.
Oh wow!
They went crazy.
Did they win against Pakistan? Because I'm sure that would have been.
They beat they beat Pakistan in the semi-finals.
Oh wow!
And I would say the celebrations for that were nearly as big, if not bigger, than those for when they beat Sri Lanka in the final. There were people lighting firecrackers in their hands, throwing them into the road. I saw vehicles with near misses crashing into each other because they were avoiding these things. Handing out free food. The place was going absolutely nuts. Interestingly enough, actually, I watched the Pakistan-India game at this house. I got invited to this Indian person's house.
Oh wow!
And of course, assumed that they would be supporting India. They were Indian, but they were Indian Muslims, and consequently, actually, they were supporting Pakistan. So pretty quickly, I realised, better switch sides here before it gets a bit uncomfortable. They were really chill. They were really cool people. Very nice, very accommodating. But yeah, they were definitely pro-Pakistan.
You go on this trip. You have a certain amount of dollars. And you say you didn't plan each destination, or did you have some kind of idea of like when?
What I did, and I suppose if people are considering doing this thing, this is something I do slightly differently. I planned flights from one country to another and booked them, most of them anyway. But I didn't really plan what I booked one day's accommodation in India, for instance, and then basically knew I had to get to Kathmandu to fly to Thailand on a certain date. And then basically I just figured out what I was going to do, where I was going to go. In India, I was a bit more scheduled because I had certain tickets for certain cricket matches, but I was only going to 3 or 4. And then other than that, I was free to kind of muck around where I wanted to. So I was semi-planned. But when I say I wouldn't recommend this, it's very easy and simple and often cheaper to book flights while you're in that country. And of course, much more flexible. Sure. You can suddenly decide, I want to do this or that. So, yeah.
And you have more options of where you can get flights out of once you get there and kind of survey what's going on.
The only thing perhaps would be, absolutely. I mean, the only thing would be with India specifically. I remember when I was there, I read an article in the newspaper which said that there had been an investigation which had found that something like 30% of commercial airline pilots didn't actually have a commercial airline pilot license because of the explosion in the middle class that was happening, from the 90s onwards. There was a huge increase in the amount of internal flights. And they didn't have the capacity for the pilots. So I'm kind of glad I booked the flights through a nice, reputable English travel agent. I didn't have to worry about, somebody who used to fly a corn crop duster taking me to
which you would have had to, back in the early 90s, you would have had to use a travel agent. There wasn't as robust of a system online to be able to do that yourself. I always tell young people, I'm like, you have the whole world at your hands. You absolutely can just go and choose where you want to go and do it tomorrow. When you and I were younger, we had to rely on a travel agent, some friends, you had to make long distance phone calls that were expensive to do things. And now it's just so simple. The world is so open and so small. Did you have like a specific event or something on your bucket list, like each of the places you went, or was it just kind of random go and experience stuff?
There were in quite a few countries, there were specific things on my bucket list. Other places, I suppose, the country itself was a bucket list for one reason or another. I grew up watching a lot of travel documentaries, and of course, like David Attenborough and Michael Palin are big heroes globally, I think, these days, but certainly in Britain. And they used to do amazing travel shows, in the case of Attenborough, wildlife shows. So, like for instance, I wanted to get to Nepal because I wanted to see Everest. I knew I wasn't going to climb Everest. I'm too paunchy for that kind of business. I wanted to eat fugu, the poisonous pufferfish in Japan. So I wanted to get there for that. But I wanted to go to Japan for other reasons. I hiked Fuji in Japan. But I just wanted to check out Japan because, I mean, it's such, it's one of the few places that is, fully economically developed, which is not entirely consumed by Western culture. So
Right.
that was one reason for wanting to go there. But there were specific things I wanted to do there: Fuji and Fugu. Hike a glacier. I did that in New Zealand, Fox Glacier.
Oh, wow.
I hiked up that. China, I climbed the holy mountains of Hang Shua. They're the ones you might have seen with the chains on vertical cliffs. They don't actually let you go up those ones. You take photos next to them because they're going to kill you. But that was amazing. So there were plenty of things that I aimed at a lot of countries because there were interesting things that I wanted to see.
And you came to the United States. What did you do here in the United States?
That was to attend Burning Man. And primarily, I mean, I wanted to go to the States for quite a while. I wanted to check out some of the national parks. It wasn't really feasible given the amount of time and money and the size of the states to get to Yellowstone. But I went to Zion, which is pretty incredible. And to attend Burning Man. Yeah.
Now, did you do this all alone? Because specifically like Burning Man, you have to join a camp. There's things that, people go alone, but usually, you're meeting people or you have a group of people that you're hanging out with for the week. What was that experience like communally for you on this trip?
Yeah, sure. So I was, I was obviously traveling. I set out alone, but I expected and did meet people. And I suppose I kind of cycled through a set of friend groups. This is one of the reasons why I mentioned earlier that I think it's sensible not to book ahead of time because you can be more flexible. Because, of course, I'd end up meeting a group of people thinking, well, you guys are cool, I'm getting on with you. And then we'd have to part ways because I had to go and catch a flight from Hong Kong or something. I met people. In terms of Burning Man specifically, I mean, you don't have to join a camp.
Right.
And that was my first time. I've been subsequent times since. I was lucky that in India, I met somebody who was moving to New Zealand. I then met up again with them in New Zealand. I think they were kind of making sure that I was chill enough. And then eventually he said, well, we have a camp. Do you want to come and camp with us? I think when I was in India, he said something about Burning Man that was quite cryptic. I can't quite remember how he described it, but I clicked immediately. I was like, oh, you're a Burnie. You go to Burning Man. He said, yeah. And then he didn't offer me a place until I met him again in New Zealand. So I was meeting a lot of people on the way around, meeting a lot of cool people. That made it a lot easier, but I mean, if you're traveling alone, you're going to meet like-minded people. It isn't going to be a problem.
What is the status of your bucket list? Are you still wrapping your head around the purpose of having one? Are you struggling to write your list and don't know what to put on it? Or are you looking at your list wondering which item to cross off first? No matter where you are in your bucket list journey, I'm here to assist you in becoming the head crosser-offer of your list. To learn how to work with me as your bucket list coach, visit crossingitoffpodcast.com/coaching to find out all about the personalized and affordable coaching I offer to help you live out your list. Now back to the show. Sure. So you met people, but this is, again, back in the 90s, before the internet, before social media.
Oh, no, this is 2011.
2011, excuse me, sorry. In 2011, so do you still keep in contact with those people today that you met? Was it easy for you to do that?
Yeah, I mean, not all of them. I mean, I keep in contact with quite a few. I mean, having gone, I don't want to drag this over to Burning Man too much, but having been a few times since, that's because I met and clicked with a lot of people who were going, who I camped with, who I subsequently camped with a lot of times. But yeah, there's plenty of people from other countries who I met, who I do still keep in contact with. I'll be honest with you, my social media presence is pretty limited. I do a job where I represent people legally. I'm not a lawyer, but I represent them legally for a trade union. And we see our members getting in a lot of trouble on social media, so I tend to avoid it. But yeah, I mean, I don't count WhatsApp as social media, and that makes it very easy to keep in contact with people these days. So yeah, totally.
Did you use that? What was the primary tool for communication when you were out there doing it? Was it WhatsApp? Was it that around back then? I think it was.
Well, no, I don't think. But either way, I was back on Facebook back then, so I was using Facebook. That was interesting when I hit places like China because at the time, China Facebook was inaccessible in China. I didn't have a mobile phone with me. So it was email. Essentially, I was having to rely on email an awful lot of the time to keep up with people. That was interesting because I had a friend from the UK who I'd been friends with for a number of years, who actually has now moved to San Francisco. And I was attempting to meet with him in Laos. And Laos is an amazing place, but it is not highly technologically developed.
Right.
And so attempting to arrange to meet with him when neither of us had mobile phones, simply by emailing each other and trying to slowly,
Yes.
well, I'm here, well, now I'm here, and we're slowly tracking each other down and getting slightly closer and closer. And it was a pretty amazing experience, finally meeting up with him after chasing each other for 2 days by email.
Wow.
And I pulled up on a boat. It was a tiny little, almost like a canoe with a motor boat on the back of it, at a place in Laos called Sifan Dong, which means 4,000 islands, I think, or 5,000 islands. It's this river delta with loads of islands on it, with these little hotels on all made out of sticks, no running water, sticks, wood, no running water. And I pulled up on the boat as the sun was going down, and my friend Mark was sat on a veranda sipping a beer with one waiting there for me, like he knew I was going to turn up. I suspect what he had done was order 2 beers for himself. Just told me he was waiting for me to turn up. But yeah, so it was possible, and it was a little bit more analog. And when it worked, it was pretty amazing. Yeah. Being cut off from that sort of communication is pleasant. You know, you're not beholden to your phone in the same way that because you're away for that long, you're not beholden to work, and all of a sudden you have that freedom. You know, despite the fact I've got to get to Kathmandu to catch a flight on the 16th of March, you do have a great degree of freedom, and that is certainly liberating. Absolutely.
So what was the one thing that, like, the one place or the one event that you attended that surprised you, that was more than what you expected?
More than what I expected. I mean, Laos was pretty special. The two, Laos was so beautiful. The jungle there is amazing. The food was incredible, basic in some ways, but everything was so fresh and delicious. The people there were so incredibly friendly. It's a country that, you know, Laos was just a real palate cleanser. It was very laid back, a real kind of slow pace to the days, and just a wildly beautiful country. The other one was actually Wellington in New Zealand. I just thought it was the funkiest city in the world. It was, you know, some really cool bars because I like to have beer, and a really nice kind of laid out and planned city. I just thought if I was going to move anywhere in the world, you know, I'm a pasty white guy. It can't be too hot, and Wellington pretty much hit that sweet spot. It wasn't too wet. Temperature was pretty good. I wasn't going to burn to death. So I thought Wellington was pretty spectacular. Yeah.
What was the one place or one event that disappointed you or didn't live up to your expectations?
You know, I think I've already mentioned that I went back to India on my honeymoon, but it took me about 5 or 6 years to kind of work up the gumption to decide I was going to do that, because India was a culture shock. It is so noisy, and every single one of your senses in India is being assaulted at every second. You know, in the middle of the night, there are packs of dogs running around wild, howling and barking in the streets in the middle of the city. You know, your nose is being assaulted all the time by sometimes wonderful smells, sometimes less wonderful smells. I don't know, you know, weirdly, I don't want to insult too many of your listeners, but I remember when I went to San Francisco for the first time, and walked down one of the streets in the city center down by the Tenderloin, and the smell of hot urine very quickly reminded me of India. So India was amazing. I had a wonderful time, but it was very intense. And when I got to Nepal, it was a real relief. I think, to be honest with you, I was just underprepared for what India was exactly. It's a hell of a country. And I went back again, as I say, on the honeymoon. Me and my wife had a wonderful time. I wouldn't by any means want to put people off going to India, but it's a continent, you know, subcontinent technically, but it is a big place with a lot to see, incredible diversity of cultures, but it is intense.
What's, besides like maybe planning more, as you said earlier, what if somebody came to you and you were having this conversation about attempting this or doing this, what would be the one thing that you would tell them that they needed to do or should do to help prepare them or to make a more fulfilling trip like that?
Well, there's two things. Like you say, apart from planning more, there is planning more, but as we kind of touched on, there's also planning less. You've got to go with the flow, and yes, you're seeing the places, but you're also meeting some wonderful people. And if you can stick around with those people for longer, then do so. Also, you're always going to underestimate the amount of money that you're going to spend, particularly when I, started off in regions of the world which were less expensive and finished my trip in Japan, New Zealand, Fiji, and the States. And of course, I needed more money at the end. So yeah, I mean, if you're going to do it without working, then you should probably overestimate the amount. Well, you're easily going to underestimate the amount of money that you're going to spend doing that. But yeah, plan less and plan more in terms of your reading about where you're going. About the cultures and the languages and things like that. But in terms of your actual movement, plan less. Plan very little in terms of that.
Yeah, it's kind of like the slow travel movement.
I mean, I think linked to that as well is to say yes, because there were a number of things that happened to me and that I experienced while I was away, because I was specifically attempting to be more open to doing that. A friend of mine had died shortly before I went on the trip, and one of the things that we did was make ourselves bracelets in his memory. The bracelet, "What would Jesus do?" We made ones which said, "What would Davy do?" And the answer for that would be to say yes to any experience that was presented to you in the given moment, to live in that moment. And consequently, I ended up being invited on many occasions by locals in lots of these countries to their homes, to their houses, to their places of worship sometimes. And particularly with things like places of worship, I had an amazing time in Nepal when I was up in the mountains. I got invited to a temple. And it was a big trek to get there through the jungle, and I was a little bit uneasy because I'm not a religious person. I didn't want to insult or cause anyone any concern, but actually it was a really incredible, peaceful. I'm not even spiritual. I don't want to use that word, but it was a remarkable thing to do. It was an incredible thing to see and share with those people. And I think possibly in a previous life, I wouldn't have necessarily said yes to that because I would have felt uncomfortable. But people want to share these things with you, and you should say yes.
Yeah, no doubt. Nick, this has been a great conversation. We could probably spend at least 3 episodes talking about this. Can you tell me before we get off here, what's one thing left on your bucket list that's completely different than like travel and that kind of stuff that you still want to cross off?
Gosh, I mean, the problem is quite a lot of them are kind of related to travel.
Sure.
I think, but I mean, I want to cycle coast to coast. That's kind of traveling. When I say coast to coast in the UK, I mean east-west. I'm not mad. I'm not going to try and cycle north to south. I'm not good enough for that. I mean, but I suppose that's travel related. I want to eat at the Fat Duck in Bray. Have you heard of the Fat Duck?
No.
The Fat Duck was previously rated the best restaurant in the world. I don't think it holds that title anymore. It used to spar for the title with El Bulli in Spain. And it's run by a guy called Heston Blumenthal, who is something of a celebrity over here. It's been 3 or possibly 4 Michelin stars for a number of years. And he does stuff like he plays with the senses. He makes what looks like a bowl of fruit, but actually, this is going to sound disgusting, it's made out of meat paste. And when you bite into the apple, it turns out to be made of pate.
Oh, geez. Oh, no, course, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I'm a textural eater.
He's famous for making snail porridge. And obviously it all sounds a little bit out there, but apparently, I like to eat well. And apparently it is something else. I've been to a few nifty restaurants, but haven't ever been to the Fat Duck in Bray. So I'd definitely like to do that.
You said it's in Bray?
Yeah, it's a village in the UK. It's in Hertfordshire, I think, but don't quote me on that. It's down south from where I am.
Okay.
So yeah, the Fat Duck in Bray.
Wow. Is it? I'm guessing 4-star Michelin. It's probably pretty expensive.
Yeah, I mean it is, but I feel really some of this terrible middle class guilt about this sort of thing sometimes. But it's not like we do it often.
Right.
Me and my family are not well off. But if when you're talking about an experience which stays with you for years and years, which some of the restaurants we've been to have been, I think you can justify that kind of bill once every year or so. You know, when you're talking about £400 or £500 a meal or something like that, it's pretty extreme. But then you pay £3,000 to go on a holiday somewhere,
right?
So yeah, I'd definitely be up for doing that. But other things that, again, they're kind of travel related, not outside the country. I want to walk the length of the United Kingdom. I have looked into that and done some preliminary research on that. But yeah, I have a 21-month-old daughter, so that was being put on the back burner for quite some time, I suspect.
Well, it's good that you were able to get some of this out of the way before that happens. And there's always time, right? She's 2.
Yeah, absolutely.
She's 2. You've got 16 years, so you'll still be able to do lots of stuff for 16 years from now.
I'll put her on my back and take her with me.
There you go. Hey, I'm all about that. When I walked the Camino de Santiago, when I would see children, I would just like freak out because I was just like so happy to see parents engaging at that level. And I stopped a British man and his daughter. She was 12, and I said, can I just talk to your daughter for a second? He's like, yeah, sure. And I was like, I just want to let you know, your dad's like super cool. You may not feel that way right now, but this is a pretty amazing thing that he's doing for you. And one day I hope you really appreciate it. And she just smiled and said, I do. So, and we wound up having second breakfast together. So it was awesome. But yeah, I love it when people expose children to that kind of travel and that kind of experience. Nick, is there any place online that you would want folks to check you out or anything like that?
This is where I'm totally useless to you, Roger.
Oh, no, you're fine.
As I mentioned before, I do not use social media.
No worries.
Other than, anonymous Reddit and WhatsApp and whatnot. No, I have nothing to promote. I have no social media. I stay away from that sort of thing. And I think my mental health is all the better for it. So that's what I recommend to your listeners.
Appreciate you coming on the show and wish you the best of luck. Yeah,
thank you so much. I enjoy the podcast. It's really enjoyable. I like the concept. So yeah, wish you luck with it going forward. Thank you, Roger.
As a reminder to our listeners, in this episode's show notes, you will find links to learn more about this week's guests and information on how you can cross this item off of your list. You can follow my adventures of crossing items off my bucket list on Instagram and Facebook. And as always, new episodes of this podcast are available to stream every Friday morning. We will meet you here next week. And until then, keep living out your list.